Chapter 1. The Ring That Reflected Nothing. It was in the final days of September when the dull skies of London seemed to mirror the gloom that had settled in Baker Street. The coal smoke clung to the air like a persistent ghost, and the rain, never quite falling, never quite stopping, smeared the windows in a perpetual haze. I was seated in my usual chair by the hearth, reviewing notes from a medical journal, though in truth my eyes had wandered more than once toward my singular companion, Sherlock Holmes. He sat as ever, like some cerebral statue, fingers steepled beneath his chin, eyes closed but mind unmistakably alert. The firelight caught upon the angles of his lean face, making him seem part mortal, part marble, a creature half born of intellect and shadow. "Watson," he said abruptly, without opening his eyes, "you are thinking that I have grown idle, are you not? My dear Holmes, I would never presume. Sure, your breathing altered after the third sigh, and your foot has tapped the floor no fewer than 7 times in the last minute. You are worried I lack stimulation." I chuckled despite myself. "Perhaps a little, Holmes. It has been some weeks since your last engagement." "And yet," he murmured, "London never sleeps. There is always a thread to tug somewhere in the fabric of deceit. Ah, listen." There came a firm knock at the door 3 times in rapid succession, followed by a pause and a final rap. Before I could rise, Holmes was already on his feet. "Inspector Lestrade," he declared. The door swung open, and sure enough, the wiry figure of Lestrade appeared in the threshold, his hat damp and his mustache twitching with unease. "Holmes," he said tersely, "we've a matter that might just suit your taste." "Odd one. Very odd." Holmes motioned him in with a courteous wave, and Lestrade, ever brisk, took the offered chair without ceremony. "Out with it," Holmes said, pouring the man a dram of whiskey. Lestrade accepted the glass with a nod, but barely sipped it before beginning. "You're familiar with Sir Giles Rathbone, retired diplomat, recently returned from Constantinople." Holmes nodded. "A formidable negotiator in his day. Made enemies in every corner of the East, but retained the king's favor. Go on." "Well, yesterday morning Sir Giles was found collapsed in his study at his Kensington home, dead as Julius Caesar. No visible wound, no sign of struggle, not a mark on the man. A heart attack? So we thought. But the family physician, Dr. Hendley, swears the man was in excellent health, fit as a fiddle, lived clean, no history of heart trouble." Holmes's eyes glittered. "And the cause of death? Still uncertain. The coroner's preliminary examination revealed nothing. But that's not the part that brought me here." Lestrade reached into his coat and withdrew a small velvet pouch. From it, he produced an object and laid it gently on the table between us. It was a ring, plain and old-fashioned, with a heavy band of dull silver. A black stone sat at its center, oddly cloudy, like obsidian caught in fog. "This," Lestrade said, "was found on the floor beside Sir Giles. None of the household recognize it. It's not his, and here's the curious bit. It reflects nothing." He leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Try it. Hold it up to the light." I obeyed, taking the ring in hand and tilting it toward the lamp. Indeed, the stone remained utterly blank. It absorbed light greedily, but gave nothing back. No glint, no shine, not even the faintest reflection of my own fingers. It was as if the stone devoured every image that approached it. Holmes examined it next, but briefly. "And what makes you think this trinket is related to the death?" Lestrade hesitated. "Because the moment the ring was moved from the study, some 2 hours after discovery, his daughter, Miss Eliza Rathbone, suffered a sudden fainting spell. No warning, no known illness. She collapsed without reason. The maid swears she had just touched the ring moments before." "Coincidence?" I offered. "Possibly," Lestrade said, but his narrowed eyes suggested he thought otherwise. There's more. Sir Giles had recently dismissed a valet. A Turkish fellow goes by the name of Kemal. No charges filed, but word is, there was some altercation. The man left the house red-faced and vowing revenge. We've not been able to locate him. Holmes's gaze returned to the ring. And the household staff? Unshaken, save for Miss Rathbone, who seems most distressed. She insists her father had grown increasingly paranoid in recent weeks. Complained of being watched, heard voices. She feared his mind was faltering. Yet no record of mental decline. None that we could confirm, but she says he became obsessed with secrecy, locked drawers, whispered conversations, always clutching that blasted ring. Holmes was silent a long moment. Then he rose and reached for his violin. As he tuned it with deliberate care, he said, "Watson, do pack a bag. I believe we shall pay a visit to Kensington in the morning." I blinked. "You suspect foul play, then?" Holmes's bow sang the first long note of a somber melody. "No, my dear Watson, I suspect something far stranger." And with that, he turned his face toward the firelight, where the ring on the table lay still, black, silent, and utterly unreflecting. Chapter 2. A whisper in Kensington. The following morning broke with reluctant sunlight peering through the haze of London's ever-present mist. The fog had softened but not dispersed, lending the streets an air of quiet secrecy as we rode toward Kensington in a hansom cab. Holmes sat with his usual repose, legs crossed, gloved hands clasped upon his knee, and a single keen eye watching the building slip past. His other hand absently toyed with a matchstick, spinning it between nimble fingers, though his gaze was far away. "You're unusually silent, Holmes," I said, glancing over from my corner of the cab. "My mind is occupied, Watson," he replied. "There is something fundamentally illogical about this case, and I find myself vexed by the absence of the obvious." "The absence of the obvious?" "Yes. The facts are not merely disjointed. They are evasive. The death of Sir Giles, the odd properties of the ring, the sudden collapse of the daughter, and the dismissed valet. All threads, certainly. But I suspect there is a knot hidden yet." The remainder of our journey passed in thoughtful quiet until the cab drew up to a wide, ivy-draped house on Prince of Wales Drive. The Rathbone residence stood with a grave dignity, its brickwork darkened by years of London soot, and its windows all drawn with thick curtains. A constable stood by the gate, and upon presenting our names, we were admitted without delay. Miss Eliza Rathbone received us in the drawing-room, a pale and finely featured young woman of perhaps 28. She wore her mourning well, an elegant gown of crepe trimmed with jet beads, and her expression composed despite the redness about her eyes. She did not rise as we entered, but gave a short, formal nod. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson, thank you for coming." Holmes inclined his head. "It is our solemn duty, Miss Rathbone. We extend our condolences." Her lips trembled faintly. It was so sudden. I still cannot believe it. One moment he was writing in his study, and the next... She trailed off. Holmes waited with his usual, respectful silence. I was in the morning room. I heard nothing. No cry, no thud. The housemaid brought tea and found him, just lying there, eyes open, as if he had seen something terrible. But there was no wound. Nothing. "Where is the study?" Holmes asked gently. She gestured toward the east corridor. "I have not entered it since. It feels..." She paused, searching for a word, as though something lingers there. Holmes did not press further. Instead, he turned toward me. "Shall we?" We found the study as she had described it, tastefully furnished, heavy with books, and dim despite the large windows. The curtains had been drawn, casting the room into a half-light. A lingering scent of cigars and old wood filled the air. Holmes made no immediate motion toward the desk or the hearth. Instead, he walked the perimeter, his eyes scanning the floor, the baseboards, the shadows beneath furniture. He paused by the tall bookshelf to run his fingers along the edges, then knelt suddenly beside the writing desk. "Blood, Watson." I joined him at once. There, nearly invisible against the patterned rug, was a pinprick smear, perhaps no larger than a thumbnail. "Too small to indicate trauma," Holmes muttered. "More a trace, and fresh too. You see the gloss still lingers." I nodded. "Curious. You believe this is from Sir Giles?" "I believe," Holmes replied, "that Sir Giles may not have been alone when he died." He rose and moved to the desk, examining the inkstand, papers, and blotter. He held up a sheet. A letter, begun and unfinished. "To the Honourable Secretary of State. I must insist the matter be reconsidered. The object cannot be trusted. Its origins are—" The sentence ended in a sharp scratch across the page, as if the pen had been torn away mid-thought. "A letter never sent," Holmes murmured, "and never completed. He was attempting to warn someone. But what object?" He turned to the fireplace, where a stand held a selection of ash-blackened pokers. One had been used recently. Holmes touched the soot with his gloved finger and brought it to his nose. Burned paper, but also, yes, something else. He pulled out a scrap from behind the grate. Though mostly consumed, one could make out part of a seal, red wax with a curious pattern, a crescent crossed by vertical lines. Holmes slipped it into his pocket and then addressed me with sudden urgency. "Let us speak with the housemaid." Miss Rathbone directed us to the servants' quarters, where we found the maid, a young woman named Clara, who spoke nervously, twisting her apron. "It was just after 9, sir. I brought the tea tray as always. Sir Giles always liked it just so. Strong, no sugar. He was particular about his routine. When I walked in, he was on the floor, not a sound from him. I screamed I did. Miss Eliza came running." "You touched nothing?" "No, sir." "Well, just the ring." Holmes froze. "You touched the ring?" "Yes, sir. It was on the rug, next to his hand. I picked it up and put it on the tray. It didn't seem right to leave it there." "You did not feel faint?" "No, sir. Not then, but what?" She glanced about. "Later that day, I had the oddest dream, sir. I was asleep in my room, but it didn't feel like a dream at all. I saw Sir Giles standing at the foot of my bed, pointing toward the study. He didn't say anything. He just kept pointing. His eyes were hollow." Holmes said nothing. Instead, he gently nodded. "Thank you, Clara. That will be all." As we stepped back into the main corridor, I said, "Surely, Holmes, you don't credit such dreams as meaningful." "No," he replied, "but they are always suggestive, particularly when more than one person in a house of good standing begins to show signs of suggestion or distress." We emerged once more into the fog-dimmed street. Holmes lit a cigarette and exhaled slowly. "Watson," he said, "we must locate this former valet, Kamal, and we must do so quickly. There is something about this ring, something that reaches far beyond this household. You believe it to be cursed?" He looked at me sideways, the hint of a smile playing at his lips. "No, Watson, I believe it to be deliberate." And with that, he hailed a cab. 221B, he instructed the driver. "There is much yet to learn, and London is full of answers, if one knows where to ask." The fog thickened behind us, wrapping Kensington in its cloak of secrets. Chapter 3. Shadows Beneath the Surface. The hansom cab rolled once more through the damp veins of London, its wheels hissing against wet cobblestone. Holmes had fallen into one of his silences, eyes half-lidded, the tips of his fingers pressed together in a temple of thought. The only sound was the rhythmic clatter of hoofbeats as we passed through Chelsea and into the tighter warren of central London. I, for my part, felt a growing unease. There was something about the house in Kensington that lingered unpleasantly in the back of my mind. Perhaps it was Miss Rathbourne's taut composure or the maid's troubling dream, but the air of the place had felt— what was the word she had used? Lingering. As if an impression had been left behind, invisible but felt nonetheless. Holmes broke the silence. "We shall not return directly to Baker Street, Watson. Our path diverges." "Oh. We are paying a visit to a friend of mine at the British Museum, a scholar of antiquities. If I am not mistaken, the crescent seal we recovered from the fireplace has its origins far from our shores." I gave a small nod, intrigued. "You believe it may be Eastern, then?" "Indeed, and quite possibly ancient. Sir Giles, after all, spent considerable time in Constantinople and was known to have an interest in objects of curious provenance. I suspect this ring, and the seal with it, are no mere trinkets." It was not long before we arrived at the southern portico of the British Museum. The drizzle had momentarily ceased, though the low clouds continued to loom like a ceiling drawn too close. Inside, the air was dry and still, and our footsteps echoed through the grand halls of marble and shadow. We were met in the Mesopotamian wing by a small, eager man with a mop of graying hair and spectacles perched permanently at the end of his nose. "Mr. Holmes, delighted as always. And Dr. Watson, I presume?" "Indeed," I said, shaking his hand. "This is Professor Archibald Trent," Holmes explained, "curator of Near Eastern antiquities and a most capable decoder of the obscure." "Obscure, Mr. Holmes," the professor chuckled. "You do flatter me." "I rely on accuracy, not flattery," Holmes replied, producing the fragment of the seal from his coat pocket. "Tell me what you make of this." Trent took the charred remnant carefully in his fingers, holding it beneath a magnifying glass. "Yes, interesting. Quite interesting. You see here, these vertical lines crossing the crescent? Not decorative. They denote a specific order of symbol used among esoteric sects of the Ottoman fringe, particularly those tied to pre-Islamic rites. This wax, yes, tinted with a mineral base, likely hematite, very old practice, likely from an object of ceremonial importance." Holmes said nothing, only nodded slowly. "May I ask where you obtained it?" Trent continued. Holmes gave the man a sharp glance. "From a dead man's hearth. It is imperative we identify any group or artifact associated with this symbol." Trent pursed his lips. "There was one manuscript. An old traveller's account I translated years ago. A minor diplomat, one Harold Muir, wrote of a society near Smyrna. He described a ring, silver, mounted with a black stone that showed not a single reflection, no matter how brightly the sun did shine upon it." "A ring," Holmes echoed. "Yes, he called it yüzüksüz aynası, the mirror without reflection. According to the account, it was believed to show the truth of a man's soul, or nothing at all if that soul were lost." "A superstitious tale," I interjected, trying not to sound dismissive. "Quite so, Doctor," Trent nodded. "But nonetheless intriguing. The manuscript suggested the ring had been taken by an English agent during a trade dispute in 1878. Muir never confirmed the identity of the man, but there were hints. A diplomat with influence in the region, someone untouchable." "Sir Giles Rathbourne," Holmes murmured. Trent's eyes widened. "You don't mean—" "I mean only that the man is now dead, and this ring may be the key." Holmes thanked the professor, pocketed the seal, and turned sharply on his heel. I followed him out into the gloomy light, my mind still spinning with implications. We climbed into another cab, and Holmes leaned forward, tapping the glass. "To the docks," he instructed. "The docks? Yes, Watson. We must locate Kamal. If I am right, he will not have strayed far. I believe the ring was meant to be returned, and if not returned, then silenced." As the cab wound southward, Holmes continued, You recall Miss Rathbourne's account. Her father whispering, locking drawers, clutching the ring. That is the behavior of a man gripped not by fear of death, but by fear of consequence. He brought something back with him, Watson. Not a relic, but a secret. One bound by oaths we do not yet understand. And you believe the valet, Kamal, was part of that secret? More likely, he was the guardian of it, or the last witness to it. Either way, he is vital. When we arrived at the dockside, grimy and bustling despite the weather, Holmes produced a photograph of Kamal given by Lestrade and began asking questions with his usual precision. At first, we received little more than shrugs and mutters. But after an hour of persistent inquiry, a dockhand finally directed us to a small public house tucked beneath the arches of a brick viaduct, the Lion's Tooth, a grimy watering hole frequented by porters, foreign sailors, and the forgotten men of the Thames. Inside, the air was thick with tobacco and sweat. Holmes moved like a bloodhound on a scent, weaving between tables until his eyes fixed upon a thin figure hunched in a shadowed corner. The man looked up as we approached, dark eyes, weary and guarded. It was Kamal. "I know why you've come," he said before Holmes could speak. His voice was low and measured. "You want the ring?" Holmes sat opposite him without hesitation. "No, Mr. Kamal. I want the truth." The man's hand trembled ever so slightly as it reached for a glass of raki. "Then you had best be prepared," Kamal whispered, "for the truth carries a price, and Sir Giles has already paid it." Watson and I exchanged a glance, the air around us thickening like the fog outside. Holmes folded his hands calmly. "Then let us begin." Chapter 4. The Gathering of Shadows. The flickering lanterns of the Lion's Tooth swayed in rhythm with a damp wind seeping in through the cracked windows, casting long, crooked shadows upon the stained floorboards. Around us, murmurs rose and fell in a dozen tongues. Arabic, Greek, Cockney, and something harsher, guttural, spoken in low corners. The place reeked of sea brine, pipe smoke, and secrets. Kamal stared down into his drink, its cloudy surface untouched since he'd spoken. His thin fingers drummed an anxious rhythm on the glass, then stopped as Holmes leaned forward. "You say Sir Giles paid a price," Holmes said evenly. "What was that price?" Kamal did not answer at once. His gaze lifted to meet Holmes's eyes, and what I saw there startled me. Neither guilt nor fear, but a kind of weary sorrow. A man who had tried and failed to prevent something from happening. "You know the ring," Kamal said. "You've seen it." Holmes nodded. "We have, and it does not reflect." Kamal let out a breath like a slow leak in a bellows. "Then you have already stepped too close to it." "We are not dabblers, Mr. Kamal," Holmes said. "We are seekers of truth." "There are truths," Kamal replied, "that do not wish to be found. That ring, Ainayok as they call it, is not a symbol, Mr. Holmes. It is a vow made solid, a promise turned to stone, and a mirror for the soul of the man who wears it." "You believe it cursed?" I asked, unable to keep the skepticism from my voice. "No," Kamal said softly. "I believe it is just. The ring reflects nothing because it chooses what to reflect, and it shows no man mercy." Holmes remained unmoved by the drama. "Let us remain anchored in fact. You served Sir Giles for 5 years." "Yes. I was placed with him by an intermediary from the ministry. They believed I could keep watch, ensure he honored certain understandings made abroad." "Understandings," Holmes repeated. "You mean conditions placed upon his possession of the ring?" Kamal nodded. He was allowed to remove it only on the condition that it remained sealed, unused, and unspoken of. Holmes's brow creased slightly. "Yet he wore it." Kamal's jaw tightened. "He grew obsessed. After a time, he would take it out from its case. He said it spoke to him in dreams, that he saw things in its black stone, shadows, warnings, Messages from beyond. I warned him, begged him to return it. He laughed at me. And then, I asked. Then I was dismissed, Kamal said bitterly. He accused me of spying. Perhaps I was. But not for a nation, for those who had kept the ring buried for generations. There are certain things, objects, yes, but more than that. Wounds in the world that must not be touched. Holmes laced his fingers together. Why come to London? Why remain here? Because I knew he would fall, and I had hoped, foolishly, that I might retrieve the ring before others did. Others, I repeated. Who else is involved in this? But Kamal shook his head, eyes flitting toward the corners of the tavern. There are always others. The ring does not sleep long in one hand, and it leaves its mark. Holmes gave him a measured look. Sir Giles had begun to act erratically, locking drawers, whispering to himself, growing paranoid. Was he being followed? I believe so, Kamal said, though I never saw them directly. Sometimes I would pass a figure in the alley behind the house, always gone too quickly, and the dog, the neighbor's retriever, would refuse to cross the threshold. It would bark, then whimper and flee. Holmes' expression darkened. You say the ring was supposed to remain sealed. Where was it kept? In a carved box, lined with lead. Sir Giles said it was to contain the echo. I never understood that. But he kept the key on his person, always. Holmes exchanged a look with me, then stood. One last question, Mr. Kamal. Do you know the meaning of this symbol? He produced the burnt seal fragment from his pocket, passing it to Kamal, who studied it for a long moment. His face changed subtly. His breath caught, and his knuckles whitened. This is not from the ring's origin, he whispered. It is from those who sought to return it. Meaning? It means they found him. Holmes turned to me with no further word and made for the door. I had to hasten after him, the sudden chill outside a shock after the close heat of the tavern. What do you make of it, Holmes? I asked as we reached the street. I make of it that Sir Giles was not the only one watching the ring, he replied grimly, and if others were involved, it is likely the ring did not remain in his possession until his death by accident. You believe he was murdered, then? I believe, Holmes said, that we are no longer dealing with a crime in the traditional sense, but with a chain of consequences triggered long ago, consequences someone is determined to bury again. We returned to Baker Street as twilight set in, the gas lamps catching the mist like ghosts leaning over the streets. Mrs. Hudson greeted us with her usual warm disapproval of Holmes's damp boots, and we retired at once to the sitting room. Holmes retrieved the ring from the drawer where he had stowed it earlier. In the firelight, the black stone looked deeper than ever, less like a gem and more like a hollow eye. It reflected nothing, not the flames, not our faces, not even the glint of the brass poker as Holmes held it nearby. He placed it back on the table with a faint shiver. I must think, he muttered. There is one more piece I cannot yet place. Just then, a knock came at the door. Mrs. Hudson's voice floated upstairs. Inspector Lestrade to see you, Mr. Holmes. Holmes glanced at me, then rose. Shall we see what Scotland Yard believes to be progress? He said with a dry smile. And so began the next chapter of the ring's unfolding tale, one marked not by what it revealed, but by what it refused to show. Chapter 5. The Man Who Fit Too Well. Lestrade entered like a man carrying news he had already rehearsed aloud, his shoulders squared, his boots still glistening from the damp street, and his expression, caught somewhere between vindication and restrained urgency, told me before he even spoke that he had something decisive to say. Holmes remained in his armchair, fingertips still steepled, his gaze steady but unreadable. Well, gentlemen, Lestrade began, removing his gloves and taking the seat near the hearth, it may interest you to know that the mystery surrounding Sir Giles Rathbone is not as mysterious as first believed. Holmes arched a brow. Indeed, the invisible assassin has been unmasked already. Lestrade ignored the sarcasm. We've made an arrest. Man by the name of Franklin Harrow. Works as a financial advisor in the city. Used to manage some of Sir Giles's overseas holdings. I'm familiar with the name, Holmes said. He was mentioned in one of Sir Giles's correspondences last year. A man of discretion, if I recall. Discretion can be a fine cloak, Lestrade replied. We found reason to suspect him after speaking with Miss Rathbone again. She recalled that her father had a series of heated arguments with Harrow regarding missing funds. Significant sums diverted during his final year in Constantinople. Missing funds, you say? I interjected. Was Harrow ever charged with mismanagement? No, but Sir Giles was preparing to report him, Lestrade explained. We found a draft of a letter to the Home Office, dated just 3 days before his death. It named Harrow explicitly. Holmes remained still. Then there's the matter of opportunity, Lestrade added, warming now to his own rhythm. Harrow was seen entering the Rathbone residence the evening before Sir Giles's death. Claims it was a scheduled visit, but there's no entry logged in the house ledger, and the staff didn't see him arrive. Holmes tapped his fingers together once. And the motive, I suppose, lies in covering his theft before Sir Giles could act. Precisely. And the ring? Holmes asked. Lestrade hesitated. Harrow claims ignorance of it. Says he never saw the thing, but we found a scrap of wax in his coat pocket. Same texture and color as the seal fragment you recovered. Holmes' expression did not change, but his silence deepened. He stared at the fire a moment longer before standing. Let us presume, for a moment, that Mr. Harrow did indeed enter the house that night. Let us accept that Sir Giles had uncovered his fraud and intended to expose him. All quite neat. Lestrade nodded. Pleased, but not quite clean, Holmes added. Lestrade frowned. How so? Holmes turned toward the writing desk, where the ring still lay. Because a financier does not murder with shadows, Lestrade. He poisons ledgers, not souls. Sir Giles died of no visible trauma, yet with a face contorted as though he had seen something that unraveled him. That is not the hand of a nervous thief. That is something else. Well, until you provide something more than ghost stories, Lestrade muttered. He'll stay in custody. Of course, Holmes said calmly. I should like to speak with him. Lestrade blinked. Now? This evening. At once. Lestrade rose reluctantly. Very well, he's being held at Bow Street. We left Baker Street under a fresh curtain of rain, the streets gleaming like mirrors beneath the gas lamps. As we rattled eastward in the cab, Holmes remained uncharacteristically silent. When I tried to press him, he held up a hand. There is something about Harrow's arrest that concerns me, Watson, he said at last. You doubt his guilt? I doubt the fit, Holmes replied. He fits too well. His motive is simple, his presence conveniently undocumented, and his reaction appropriately startled. But this crime, this death, was not a clumsy thing. It was precise, executed with knowledge and intent. Sir Giles was silenced, yes, but by a method beyond the reach of desperation. We arrived at Bow Street and were led down a corridor of iron bars and low murmurs. In the final cell, Franklin Harrow sat with his arms crossed and a deep scowl fixed to his lips. He was a stout man in his early 40s with thinning auburn hair and fingers that twitched as if still calculating sums. Mr. Harrow, Holmes greeted, stepping to the bars. I am Mr. Sherlock Holmes. I understand you are acquainted with the late Sir Giles Rathbone. I'm acquainted with a travesty, Harrow snapped, and falsely accused. I'm not from the yard. I'm not here to trap you, Holmes said gently. I'm here to understand what you know, whether or not it helps your case. Harrow eyed him a moment, then sighed. I did go to see Sir Giles that night. But not to murder him. Then why? To beg his silence. I did divert funds, yes, but not for personal gain. Sir Giles had arranged certain shipments under diplomatic cover, artifacts, some of them forbidden. When he returned to London, he demanded I continue the payments, though the accounts were already strained. I refused. He threatened me. Did he mention the ring? At that, Harrow's eyes narrowed. He had been acting strange for weeks. Said he had something the world must not see. Kept it on his person like a relic. Once, he dropped it during a meeting. I picked it up. It felt cold, unnaturally so. He snatched it back like a viper. "You touched it?" Holmes asked quickly. "Yes." "Briefly, why?" Holmes was silent. "Sir Giles dismissed me from the study. He said I had seen too much already. I left angrily. Yes, but I swear he was alive when I walked out." Lestrade stepped forward. "And the wax seal in your coat?" "I had no idea it was there. He must have placed it." Holmes raised a hand. "Enough. I believe you." Lestrade looked aghast. "You what?" "He may be guilty of many things," Holmes said softly, "but he is not guilty of this." As we left the station, the night pressing in with a thick fog, Holmes spoke only once before returning to silence. "There is another presence in this puzzle, Watson. One we have not yet seen, but I suspect it sees us." And with that, he closed his eyes in the cab, the rain murmuring against the glass like a whisper from a shadow not yet named. Chapter 6. The Gloved Hand. The following morning brought little in the way of sunlight. The sky hung low and grey above Baker Street, a stagnant pall that refused to lift. It was the sort of weather that dulled the edges of time, giving one the sense that the day might never properly begin. I found Holmes already at work by the time I entered the sitting room. His desk was cluttered with papers, a small brass microscope, and 2 small vials. One clear, the other tinted a faint red. He had not touched his tea, though the cup steamed beside him. "You were up early," I remarked, taking my seat by the fire. "I scarcely slept," Holmes replied. "The fit remains wrong, Watson, like a puzzle with a false piece forced into place." "You still believe Harrow is innocent, then?" "Not of everything," Holmes said. "But of murder, yes. His sins are bureaucratic, perhaps even cowardly, but not lethal." He motioned for me to join him. I stood and looked down at the desk. "Observe," Holmes said, pointing to a set of fingerprints dusted faintly across the blackened base of the seal fragment. "I examined this late into the night. There are 2 distinct impressions on the wax, one thick and broad. No doubt Sir Giles, the other smaller, narrower, perhaps a woman's." "A woman?" I echoed. "Miss Rathbone?" "That remains to be seen. But more intriguing than the print is this." He shifted a sheet of notes toward me. It contained a rough timeline. Columns labeled sightings, anomalies, witnesses, and physical effects. I recognized Clara's fainting episode, Harrow's account of the ring's unnatural coldness, Kemal's mention of strange watchers in the alley, and even the dog's refusal to enter the house. "You are mapping the ring's impact?" I asked. "Precisely. I've begun to suspect that its influence is not merely psychological. The symptoms follow exposure with too precise a rhythm: fainting, disorientation, dread. You believe the ring to possess some, what unnatural property?" "I believe," Holmes said, standing, "that the ring is not merely an object. It is a signal, a message encrypted not in language, but in sensation, and someone has learned to use it." He turned toward the coat stand and reached for his gloves. "We are returning to Kensington." "To Miss Rathbone?" "No," he replied, sliding into his overcoat. "To the study. There is one drawer we have not yet opened." When we arrived, the constable stationed outside the Rathbone residence gave Holmes a weary nod. It seemed our presence had become expected. Miss Rathbone greeted us herself, her complexion paler than before, her hands clutched tightly before her. "You're back," she said softly. Holmes bowed his head. "If it is not an imposition." She led us through the corridor once more to the study, The air felt unchanged, still thick, still unmoving. "I have not entered since your last visit," she said. "I dreamt of it last night." My father's voice, speaking from behind the desk, though I could not see him. Holmes glanced at her. "What did he say?" "Only one word, gloved." Holmes turned slowly toward me. "Watson." "Yes?" "The gloves I asked you to bring." I produced them from my coat pocket, thin, flexible leather, perfectly fitted to Holmes's specifications. He pulled them on and stepped toward the desk. His hands hovered over the surface for a moment before he knelt down and inspected the underside. With a small grunt of satisfaction, he reached beneath the central drawer and pressed upward. A faint click sounded, and a hidden compartment opened just above the drawer's interior. From within, Holmes extracted a small, weathered envelope bound in twine and sealed with the same crescent-marked wax. "Sealed again," I muttered. Holmes turned it carefully. "The wax is fresh, likely resealed after the original letter was removed." He set the envelope down and drew a thin scalpel from his coat. With careful hands, he sliced along the side seam and retrieved its contents. Inside was a single slip of parchment, folded once, yellowed at the edges. Holmes opened it. There were only 2 lines written in a tight, angular script. It was not the ring they feared, but the mirror it hid. "Do not let her wear it." Holmes read the words aloud, then fell silent. "She?" I said. He looked up slowly. "Miss Rathbone." Before I could speak again, the study door creaked. Eliza stood in the threshold, eyes wide. I heard my name." Holmes held the letter behind his back. "Miss Rathbone, may I ask, have you worn the ring?" She blinked. "No, never. Only once I held it when I found it by his side. I picked it up." "For how long?" "Just a moment. It felt hollow, as if I were holding nothing at all." Holmes stepped forward. "And since then?" She hesitated. "I've felt watched, as though something follows me. Not in the house, but in mirrors. My own reflection changes. It smiles when I do not. It lingers when I walk away." Holmes exchanged a glance with me, then turned gently toward her. "I must ask something difficult," he said. "Would you permit me to examine your room, particularly your dressing mirror?" She nodded faintly. "Of course." Holmes followed her out. I remained behind, staring at the hidden compartment. Something still troubled me. The gloved reference, the warning not to let her wear it, the ring as a mirror. When I rejoined them moments later, Holmes stood before the mirror in Miss Rathbone's room. It was a tall, silver-trimmed glass, slightly tarnished at the edges. "What do you see, Watson?" he asked. "Myself," I replied. "And yet," he said, pointing, "look closer at her image." I did, and felt a sudden chill. Her reflection smiled. She did not. Holmes reached into his coat and placed the ring upon the dressing table. Instantly, the reflection in the mirror flickered, as if caught in a breeze, though no air stirred. Miss Rathbone gave a faint gasp. Holmes lifted the ring again. The flicker ceased. "I believe," he said slowly, "that someone has found a way to anchor an influence in the stone. Not magical, no, but psychological. Optical, perhaps. A trick of light, suggestion, and will. But someone, Watson, is watching through it. And it is not Sir Giles." I looked toward Eliza. "Then who?" Holmes placed the ring back in his pocket. "That," he said, "we must now discover." The house was still once more, but the shadows did not feel empty. Something watched. From behind the glass or from beyond it, I could not say. But I felt it, and I knew Holmes did too. Chapter 7. The Man with No Reflection. We returned to Baker Street beneath a sky beginning to bruise purple at the edges. The fog had lifted slightly, but still clung to the rooftops like an old secret, reluctant to release its grip. I walked in silence beside Holmes, my mind spinning not with deduction, but with the troubling image that now refused to leave me, the reflection that had smiled when its subject had not. Back in our sitting room, Holmes wasted no time. He placed the ring beneath a heavy glass dome on the mantel, as though the barrier might stifle whatever malign influence it carried. He then lit his pipe and paced, the smoke rising like wisps of thought curling through the lamplight. "I've encountered many peculiar phenomena in my time, Watson," he began. "But this walks a line most thin between psychology and deception. If someone is using the ring to transmit fear or suggestion, perhaps through light, magnetism, or other physical properties, then it must require proximity and, more importantly, observation." "Observation," I echoed. "As in, being watched?" Holmes tapped his pipe thoughtfully. "We already know the ring distorts reflections. But the presence in that distortion, its intelligence, its choice to act, suggests more than optical trickery. It suggests a design." He strode to the window, threw it open, and stared out into the quiet street below. "Someone is watching, not just through glass, through us, through those who touch the ring or stand too near it." I stood, uneasy. "Then whoever or whatever lies behind the ring may be aware of our every move." "Not every move," Holmes said, "but certain moments, when the ring is unguarded or when a mind is particularly vulnerable, it may be less like a window and more like a door, only occasionally opened." He turned sharply. "We need to know who introduced it into Sir Giles' possession. Kamal claimed the ring was given on the condition that it remained sealed, but someone else must have brought it out, unlocked the metaphorical door." "Miss Rathbone?" "No," Holmes said. "She is affected, not orchestrating, and Harrow, though convenient, is not capable of constructing so intricate a trap. We need someone else, someone forgotten or concealed." At that moment, a knock echoed from the front door below. Holmes froze. We both heard Mrs. Hudson answer it, followed by the low murmur of a voice. Male, educated, restrained. Then a moment later, footsteps on the stairs. A gentleman entered, tall and lean, with the stiff composure of someone used to bearing titles. He wore a black coat and gloves, and beneath his arm he carried a flat leather portfolio. His eyes were pale grey, so pale as to seem almost colourless, and his voice was as smooth as glass. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson, I thank you for receiving me unannounced." Holmes studied the man. "You have the advantage of us." "Ah, apologies. My name is Alaric Mortlake. I was known to Sir Giles. In our diplomatic circles, we often crossed paths. I have come because I believe I may be of assistance, and perhaps in danger." Holmes gestured toward the hearth. "Please, speak freely." Mortlake did not sit. Instead, he opened his portfolio and withdrew a single sheet of parchment, ancient, creased, and inked in a language neither I nor Holmes immediately recognized. Holmes stepped forward. "That script," he murmured. "Old Anatolian." "Very good," Mortlake replied. "Pleased. It is a fragment of a charter, written during the reign of Bezidwa. It details an oath made by a secretive order charged with guarding an artifact they referred to as the witness that sees without eyes." "The ring," I said softly. Mortlake nodded. "I was with Sir Giles when he obtained it. He believed it to be symbolic, a ceremonial item, part of a political exchange. But he was warned not to wear it, only to keep it sealed and protected." He laughed at the notion. "Naturally. Rational men often do." Holmes narrowed his eyes. "And you? Did you wear it?" "I did not," Mortlake said. "But I observed him. I saw the change. He became suspicious, erratic. He claimed to dream of his own death, that mirrors showed him events yet to happen. Terrible things. That the ring had begun to choose what it revealed. Holmes paced away. You say you may be in danger. Why now? Because, Mortlake replied. Someone has followed me since Sir Giles's death. Always just behind me. A figure, sometimes in black, sometimes in white. Never near enough to identify. And, this morning, I awoke to find all the mirrors in my home had cracked. My heart beat faster at that. Holmes, however, only turned slowly toward the fireplace. Do you have a mirror on you, Mr. Mortlake? Mortlake frowned. No. Holmes crossed to the side table and retrieved a small hand mirror. He passed it to the man. Please, look into it. Mortlake raised the mirror without hesitation. Holmes watched him carefully. So did I, and then it happened. For the briefest second, Mortlake's reflection remained still as he turned his head, as if it hesitated, reluctant to follow. Then it snapped back into place. Holmes exhaled. You've touched the ring. No, Mortlake said, lowering the mirror. I never. You don't need to wear it. Contact is enough. A moment's touch, a brush of the fingers. Perhaps when helping Sir Giles open the case? Mortlake was silent. Holmes stepped closer. It's inside you now, Mr. Mortlake. Whatever signal it gives off, whatever awareness it draws, you've become part of it. The man looked ill, genuinely shaken. What does it want? He asked. Holmes turned his gaze to the ring beneath the glass dome. That, he said softly, is what we must learn before it chooses another host. Outside, the wind rose suddenly, scattering papers along the desk. And for a moment, just a moment, the lamp beside the mirror flickered. But there was no draught. And in the glass, the shadows deepened. Chapter 8. Holmes tests a theory. It was just past 9 the following morning when I awoke to find Holmes already dressed and in motion. He stood by the hearth, coat buttoned, boots shined, and eyes alight with the sharp energy I had come to recognize as a sign that something was about to be provoked, deliberately and with precision. You slept well, Watson? He asked, not turning. Moderately, I muttered, rubbing my eyes. Though, I confess, every time I glanced at the mirror, I half expected my reflection to behave unnaturally. Holmes turned, his expression unreadable. A rational response, given the evidence. I swung my legs over the side of the bed. You're going somewhere? Indeed. We have work to do. The pattern is incomplete, but the pieces are aligning. The time has come to test a theory. A theory regarding what? Holmes crossed the room, opened a drawer, and removed a slim velvet box. He held it up briefly. Inside, the ring sat nestled in black satin, its dark stone lifeless and still. I believe this object functions as more than a passive transmitter. I believe it requires emotional tension, fear, grief, guilt to function at full intensity. Sir Giles, Miss Rathbone, Mortlake, they were all affected most acutely after certain psychological thresholds had been breached. You're saying it feeds on distress? Not feeds, Watson. Activates. Think of it like a lens, one which only aligns when a particular emotion warps the light passing through it. And how do you propose to prove that? Holmes offered a thin smile. We introduce it to someone without fear. That morning, we returned to the Lion's Tooth. The streets were quiet, the air damp with a clinging mist that made every step feel soundless and slow. Kamal was there, seated at the same table in the back, a pipe in hand and a chessboard laid out before him, though no opponent sat across. He looked up, unsurprised. You have come again. I need your help, Holmes said directly. There is something I wish to try. Something only you may be suited to assist with. Kamal gestured to the seat opposite. Sit, speak. Holmes placed the velvet box on the table and opened it. Kamal inhaled sharply. The ring, he said. Holmes nodded. You told me you served to keep it sealed. You never wore it, but you were near it for years. Kamal's eyes narrowed. "And what do you seek from me now?" "A test. I believe the ring reacts to certain people more than others. But not by accident. You, Kamal, are unusual in this equation. You were exposed to the ring for longer than any other, yet you exhibit none of the symptoms." Kamal gave a slight nod. "That is because I do not fear it." "Exactly," Holmes said. "I believe your mind is anchored, disciplined. You represent a control. If you can handle the ring without effect, while others cannot, then perhaps it is not merely the ring that is dangerous, but the person who touches it." Kamal stared at the box a long moment. Then, without a word, he reached in and picked up the ring. I tensed unconsciously. Holmes watched closely, his gaze sharp. The moment passed. Kamal turned the ring slowly in his fingers. "It is cold," he said, "but not more than silver should be. It stirs nothing." Holmes took a notebook from his coat and jotted something quickly. Then he produced a hand mirror and passed it to Kamal. "Look," he said. Kamal raised the mirror. We all stared. His reflection behaved as it should. Holmes leaned in. "Do you feel any difference?" "No." "See anything behind you? In the corners?" Kamal smirked faintly. "Only the damp rot of this place." Holmes retrieved the ring carefully and returned it to the box. Then he turned to me. "Now, Watson." "Me?" I blinked. "I've held it before. When Lestrade first brought it. But not for long, not after what we've learned." He held the box toward me. I hesitated. "It's quite safe," Holmes said. "Unless, of course, you've been keeping secrets." I gave him a dry look and reached for the ring. It was cold, far colder than I recalled. The chill crept into my fingertips and up my wrist. I turned it, trying to focus on the stone. Black, clouded, absorbing light as before, but my breath caught. There was a shimmer, a brief flicker beneath the surface, as though something had blinked, something just beneath the surface. "Holmes," I said quietly. "I saw it," he replied. He passed me the mirror. I raised it. My reflection met my gaze. Normal at first, but then a twitch. My head turned a half-second late. My eyes blinked, but not in time with my own. I dropped the mirror. Holmes was already taking the ring from me, wrapping it in a cloth. "Fascinating," he muttered. "The ring reacts differently to each subject. Kamal untouched. You, some resistance, but not immune. And yet Sir Giles, Mortlake, and Miss Rathbone were all vulnerable." "What does that suggest?" I asked, still unsettled. "That the ring is selective. It does not act at random. It seeks entry points. Cracks in the wall." Kamal spoke, his voice unusually firm. "Then the one who created it knew what kind of minds it would influence." Holmes turned slowly. "Or perhaps the one who uses it now has learned how to direct it." He closed the box and stood. "Come, Watson. We have one last avenue to explore today." "Where to?" Holmes paused at the door. "The Rathbone household. I believe we've overlooked someone." As we emerged once more into the grey haze of London, I found myself glancing not at the pavement, nor the people around us, but at windows, at the way they seemed to darken as we passed, at the reflections that waited just a moment too long before moving. Chapter 9. The Housemaid's Silence. The cab ride back to Kensington was subdued, our breaths briefly visible in the chill that had settled over the city like a velvet shroud. The shadows clung lower than before, and Holmes, though alert, said little as we rumbled over the slick stones of Queen's Gate. "The ring is not merely a relic," he finally muttered. "It is a conduit, but a conduit to whom or what, I am not yet certain." "You said we'd overlooked someone," I prompted. Holmes nodded, pulling his collar up against the wind. "Yes, someone in the Rathbone house. Someone who had access not only to the study, but to Sir Giles's routine. Someone who might have moved the ring or watched him closely in the days leading to his death. The maid? Precisely. Clara. We arrived just after noon. A constable recognized us from prior visits and allowed us in without fuss. The interior was quiet, the air tense in that way only grieving households manage. No sobs, no commotion, just the creaking of floorboards and the hush of unspoken unease. Miss Eliza Rathborne met us in the hall, dressed in grey now rather than black. Her expression was taut with fatigue. "You're back," she said. "Have you learned something?" "We may be near a conclusion," Holmes answered gently. "But we would like to speak with your maid, Clara, alone if possible." Her eyes flickered. "Of course. She's in the conservatory." We found Clara seated in the warmth of that glass chamber at the rear of the house, where the winter light filtered down through clouded panes. She was trimming a potted hyacinth with delicate scissors and started when we approached. "Mr. Holmes," she said. "Doctor." Holmes inclined his head. "Clara, I wish to revisit the events of the morning your master died. You said you found him on the floor. Did you enter without knocking?" "I knocked, sir," she replied quickly. "He didn't answer, but I assumed he was asleep or deep in thought." "He often was." "You touched the ring," Holmes said. "Yes," she said softly. "I told you. I picked it up. It looked wrong just lying there. I meant no harm." "And since then?" Holmes asked. "Have you felt strange?" Clara's eyes lowered to the flower in her lap. "I've had dreams," she said. "But everyone dreams. Mine are just different now." Holmes waited. "I see the master's study," she continued, "but not as it is. It's darker, covered in ivy. The windows are gone, and there's always a shape in the corner, watching. Do you recognize it?" She shook her head. "No, but it knows me." Holmes crouched slightly, bringing himself level with her eyes. "Clara," he said gently, "do you know who last opened the box containing the ring before Sir Giles's death?" She hesitated. Then, barely audible, "Yes." Holmes nodded slowly. "Was it you?" Her hands trembled on the shears. She didn't speak. Holmes continued, his voice calm even. "I believe someone manipulated Sir Giles into opening the ring's box, into wearing it. Perhaps he resisted at first. But someone nudged him." Clara looked up at that, and in her eyes I saw something terrible. Guilt, yes, but also something deeper. Obedience. "I didn't mean to," she whispered. "Truly I didn't, but he left it out. The case, unlocked, just once, and I was told to bring it to him." "Told?" Holmes asked. Her lips parted, but no sound came. Holmes leaned forward. "Who told you, Clara?" She blinked hard. "A man. Not in the house. He came to the back gate one evening. Said he was with the Foreign Office, said Sir Giles had forgotten something abroad, some formality, and that the ring had to be affirmed. I didn't understand, but he said if I gave it to him to wear, even just for a moment, it would fulfill the condition. Then the embassy could collect it. He said Sir Giles would be grateful." "You believed him?" "I—" Her voice cracked. "He knew things. He knew Sir Giles's habits, what he drank, the name of his dog from when he lived in Izmir. I thought maybe it was all official. And he looked right." "Describe him," I said. She closed her eyes. "Tall, pale. His coat was black, but polished, like silk. His gloves were white. And his eyes were the color of smoke." Holmes straightened. "You gave the ring to Sir Giles that night." "I left it in his chair," she admitted. "When he came in, I said nothing, just left the tray." "You've seen the man since?" Clara nodded slowly. "In the mirror. Twice. Once behind me, once beside the fire." Holmes stood. "You're certain he wasn't physically in the room?" "There was no sound," she whispered. Just his image. Holmes offered her a soft look. You were manipulated, Clara, but we must find this man before he acts again. He turned to me, his tone changing. Watson, we're not just tracking a killer, we're tracking someone who understands how to use belief as a weapon. We left Clara shaken but safe and returned to the hall, where Eliza Rathborne waited with tightly folded arms. You believe her, then? She asked. Holmes nodded. I believe someone preyed on her trust, and I believe your father's death was not accidental nor personal. It was ritualistic, a performance with a purpose. Eliza's voice trembled. But what could the purpose possibly be? Holmes met her gaze with grave certainty. To awaken the ring. He turned to go. Come, Watson. We must speak with Professor Trent again. There is more to this relic than even he guessed. As we stepped out into the gathering dusk, the last of the light caught in the rain-slicked windows of the house behind us. And in one pane, I thought I saw a silhouette standing still. No shape, no movement, just presence. Watching. Chapter 10. The Archive Beneath the Museum. The British Museum, cloaked in the muted gold of a rain-slick afternoon, seemed to rise from the mist like a temple of knowledge too ancient for its city. Holmes and I entered through the side entrance, familiar to him, less so to me, where we were met by a clerk who led us without a word through narrow back corridors lit only by low gas lamps. Professor Archibald Trent awaited us at the threshold of a locked stairwell, a ring of iron keys jangling softly at his side. You said it was urgent, he murmured to Holmes as he opened the gate and motioned us downward. What you seek isn't in any public catalogue. Then we are in the right place, Holmes replied, already descending. The air below was colder, the stone walls slick with moisture, the smell of vellum, dust, and something older, earthier, clung to every breath. We entered what the professor called the archive vault, a sealed repository of documents not deemed safe or stable enough for public handling. It was a room of silence, thick silence, broken only by the creak of floorboards and the hum of our own presence. You asked me to search for references to the ring, Trent began, setting a large folio down on the central table. This is what I found. He opened it reverently. Inside was a letter written in French, dated 1813. The parchment was brittle, stained at the edges, but legible. It's a translation, he explained, of a passage from an older Ottoman scroll. It details the beliefs of a sect known as the Gözküller, or the Watchers. Holmes leaned over the script. I know of them. A peripheral brotherhood. Survived the collapse of the Seljuk Empire. Most believe them fictional. Trent tapped the page. And yet here they are. They believe that certain objects, rings, mirrors, blades, could hold fragments of human perception, emotions, even memories. That under the right conditions, these objects could remember what they had seen and show it again to others. Residual impressions, I said quietly. Holmes nodded. But directed impressions. The ring we've seen does not merely replay. It adapts. It chooses. That requires will. Trent hesitated. There is one passage you may find especially troubling. He turned the page and pointed to a dark inked symbol, the crescent crossed by vertical lines, identical to the one we had seen on the melted seal. This, he said, was a marker left only when a rite had been fulfilled. A successful binding. It was stamped on documents, objects, even bodies, after the ring had been worn and the subject broken. Broken, I asked. Not in the physical sense, Trent said. Broken in reflection. A person who no longer saw themselves in mirrors. Or worse, someone who saw something else looking back. Holmes leaned forward. Trent, tell me, is it possible that a person could use the ring knowingly? That it could be controlled? The professor's lips pressed into a grim line. There is a theory, he said, that a person without reflection, metaphorically speaking, could manipulate the ring without consequence. Someone who sees only others. A mind trained not to be, but to observe. A voyeur, Holmes murmured. A vessel, Trent corrected. Not driven by ego, but by will. If such a person exists and understands the ring's nature, they could direct it, send it toward others, influence what it reveals. Holmes was quiet a long moment. Then he asked, what would be their purpose? Trent closed the book. To collect, not wealth, not power, faces, memories, shadows of men. To become something greater, not by being remembered, but by remembering others completely and erasing them in the process. Holmes turned to me. Sir Giles, Mortlake, Miss Rathbone. They are not just victims. They are reflections, stolen, their fears, their secrets, all absorbed. And the man Clara described, I asked. The one with the white gloves? Holmes gave a grave nod. He's not a ghost, Watson. He's a collector. Trent took a step back. Then you may be running out of time. If the ring has been awakened, truly awakened, then he is likely seeking his next vessel. Holmes turned to the table, pulled from his pocket the sealed envelope we had recovered from Sir Giles' study, and laid it beside the ancient folio. The symbols matched. Sir Giles was never meant to survive, he said. Nor was Clara. Nor Eliza. He was preparing them. Watching them crumble, waiting to see which one the ring would choose. I swallowed. And once chosen? They disappear, Holmes said. Not physically, but internally. Their sense of self becomes unmoored. Their image in mirrors, in memory, in others, flickers, fades, and eventually fails. Trent looked between us, eyes wide behind his spectacles. There's one last entry. From 1796. It speaks of a man they called the listener in glass. Never caught. He passed from host to host, never aging, never traced. They said his face had become refraction, a shape seen only by those moments before death. We left the archives in silence, ascending into a world that suddenly felt thinner, less real. Outside, the clouds had thickened again. The city swam in reflection. Wet streets, window panes, and carriage lanterns. Everywhere I looked, I saw myself, until I didn't. For just a second, in the window of a passing carriage, I saw Holmes and myself walking. But only Holmes cast a reflection. Then it was gone, and the mist rolled on. Chapter 11. The Bait in Glass. It was after nightfall by the time we returned to Baker Street. The street lamps burned low behind their frosted globes, casting fractured halos across puddled pavements. The fog had thickened once more, and it pressed against the windows of our sitting room as though it longed to enter, to seep between the cracks and observe in silence. Holmes moved with swift precision, gathering notes, arranging correspondence, and lighting the gas lamps with methodical force. I watched him in silence for some minutes before speaking. You have a plan, I said finally. He didn't look up. Of course. To catch the one Clara saw? To lure him, Holmes corrected. There's a difference. I have no intention of chasing a man who thrives in shadows and silence. We must make him step into the light. And how do you propose to do that? Holmes set down his pen and turned to me, the flame of the lamp flickering in his eyes. We bait the hook with something he wants. I frowned. The ring? No, Holmes said. The mirror. The mirror, Watson. The one that showed Eliza's reflection smiling. The one in which Clara saw a figure standing behind her. It is the threshold, the gate. He looks through it, but he does not yet suspect that someone might look back. I felt a shiver rise up my spine. You mean to confront him? Holmes nodded. But not directly. That would be foolish. No, we let him believe the trap is his own. That he is the one drawing us in. Only then will he reveal himself. He moved to the mantel and retrieved the ring from beneath its glass dome. Then, with careful hands, he wrapped it in a cloth of black silk and slipped it into a small leather pouch, which he secured within the lining of his coat. "I shall need you to do something for me tonight, Watson," he said, reaching for his gloves. "Something dangerous." "You know I will." He gave me a rare look of gratitude. "Then come. We have one more visit to make." We arrived at the Rathbourne house under cover of darkness. The streets were quiet, the windows of the manor dim save for a single faint glow in the study. Miss Eliza met us at the door in a silk robe, her hair pulled tightly back. Her expression was strained, her voice thinner than I remembered. "He's been here," she said before we could speak. "Not in the house, but I saw him, in the glass of the garden door. He was standing where the roses used to grow, just standing, watching." Holmes placed a reassuring hand on her arm. "You've been very brave, but I need to ask more of you." She looked up at him with dry, fearful eyes. "I must borrow your mirror," he said. By 10 o'clock, the study had been transformed. Holmes had positioned the tall dressing mirror across from the hearth, angled just so, catching the firelight in warped, wavering hues. A second, smaller mirror was placed near the window, angled to reflect the first, creating an infinite tunnel of mirrored surfaces that seemed to vanish into some unknowable distance. He had also drawn the curtains tightly, lit 3 candles, and extinguished the gas lamps, leaving the room in a hush of shifting shadows. Finally, he placed the ring in its open box upon a table directly before the tall mirror. The black stone caught no light, but it seemed to throb slightly, as though aware of its renewed presence in the house. Holmes turned to me. "You will sit here?" he said, indicating the chair in front of the mirror. "You must not speak. Do not move. And whatever you see, do not break eye contact with your reflection." I opened my mouth to protest, but he held up a hand. "This is how it communicates. Not with voice, not with sound, but with presence. You must hold its gaze as long as it gives you one. And you?" "I shall be hidden," Holmes said, indicating a dark alcove behind the bookshelf. "I'll observe from beyond its field of vision, but if my theory is correct, it won't be me he wants to see." I sat. The mirror loomed before me, tall and warped at the edges, the fire's flickering glow dancing like phantoms across its glass. Behind me, the reflection of the ring lay still and silent. 10 minutes passed. 20. The only sound was the faint ticking of the clock on the mantel. Then, without warning, the temperature dropped. I felt it on my skin, the hairs rising along my arms. The fire still burned, yet the air grew colder. The reflection shifted. My own face, my exact likeness, stared back. But it no longer followed my movements with perfect precision. There was a lag, a hesitation. My hand remained still, but the reflection's fingers twitched. Then it smiled. I did not. Behind me, in the reflection, not the room, a figure emerged. It was tall, clad in a black coat with white gloves. The face was indistinct, as if blurred by water, but the eyes were the color of smoke. He stood behind me in the mirror, yet the room itself remained empty. I felt a voice, not in my ears, but in my mind. "You've seen too much." Still, I did not blink. The reflection's smile faded. It tilted its head, mimicking me now, not predicting. The man behind me raised a gloved hand and pointed toward the ring. The image pulsed. A second figure emerged in the infinite reflections beyond. Far smaller, nearly imperceptible. Holmes. Hidden, but there. And then, in a single instant, everything shattered. The glass of the mirror splintered outward, the ring box snapped shut on its own, and I was thrown back from the chair as if struck. Holmes was on me in a flash, grabbing my shoulder. "Watson, are you—" "I saw him," I gasped. I heard him. Holmes turned to the mirror, now fractured into a spiderweb of cracks, and retrieved the ring. It was warm now, pulsing faintly like a heartbeat. He slipped it into the pouch, sealed it, and turned to me. The trap worked, he said grimly. But did we catch him? I asked. No, Holmes replied, eyes still fixed on the glass. But now he knows we're hunting him. And that, Watson, may be the first step in drawing him into our world, where he cannot hide. Behind us, the last candle flickered out, and the mirror, though cracked, still held its reflections. One too many. Chapter 12. A presence in the glass. The shattered mirror was still there when we returned to the study at first light. Eliza Rathborne stood beside it with a blanket wrapped tightly around her shoulders, her expression composed, but the tension in her jaw betrayed the weight of the night. Holmes inspected the broken glass in silence, his fingers tracing along the deepest fractures. No blood, no shards flung outward. The glass had not exploded. It had collapsed, as though something on the other side had pressed too hard to come through. Did anything else happen after we left? Holmes asked her without turning. No, she replied, but the air grew cold again. I heard footsteps in the corridor outside my room. When I opened the door, nothing was there, only the faintest smell like ash and damp stone. Holmes met her gaze. It's closing in. He reached into his coat and pulled out the leather pouch containing the ring. Wrapped in silk, it seemed innocuous now, just a weight in the hand. But I knew better. Watson, Holmes said. You were exposed to its full influence last night. How do you feel? I considered the question. Like someone had been whispering behind my back all night. I remember everything clearly, but when I look into a mirror now, even briefly, I expect to see... not myself. Holmes gave a grim nod. It leaves an impression, but you are not chosen. Chosen? He turned to the window. Sir Giles. Mortlake. The man Clara described. They were marked. The ring didn't simply observe them, it entered them, resided in them until it learned what it needed. And what does it need? I asked. Holmes's face darkened. A new host. He looked once more to Eliza, whose expression had gone pale. No, she whispered. You're not saying... Miss Rathborne, Holmes said gently. It has failed twice to anchor itself, in your father, in Harrow, possibly even in Mortlake, though I suspect he resisted more than we know. Now it searches again, and you are vulnerable. Tears welled in her eyes, but she didn't cry. She simply sat on the edge of the desk, looking at the broken mirror, at the distorted reflections. Hers moved when she did, but not quite in sync. Holmes turned to me. We must finish this. You mean destroy the ring? No, he said. That would be useless. Objects like this are never singular. If it is part of a system, as Trent believes, there are others. Destroy this one, and the signal may jump, or worse, multiply. I furrowed my brow. Then what are we to do? Holmes paced the room slowly, then paused at the fire. We contain it. He looked up. Watson, I need to borrow a device from Scotland Yard's evidence archive. You'll accompany me. It's kept in one of the restricted vaults. An ossuary box lined with lead and obsidian. They seized it 2 years ago from an unregistered spiritualist society in Chelsea. I blinked. You think it will hold the ring? I believe it was designed to hold something very similar. He turned back to Eliza. You must remain here. Do not leave the house. Do not open any doors unless you are certain who is knocking. Do not look too long into any reflective surface. She swallowed hard and nodded. Will it come for me again? Holmes hesitated. If it does, don't answer. Not even in thought. That's how it speaks. That's how it enters. The vault at Scotland Yard required no small amount of persuasion, but Lestrade, though sceptical, relented once Holmes explained the threat in suitably bureaucratic language. A high-value cultural artifact of foreign origin, recently connected to a string of deaths and hallucinations. That was enough to get us access to Vault 6. The box was there. Small, no larger than a Bible, and reinforced with inlaid obsidian plates and lead lining. No markings, no keyhole. Its lid slid shut with a hiss, and when I touched it, I felt a pressure behind my eyes, as though I were holding a closed eye in my hands. "Take care with it," the custodian warned. "Some say it's cursed." "Good," Holmes replied. "We intend to put something cursed inside it." By evening, we returned to Kensington. Holmes had prepared the study once more, this time sealing the windows, removing all glass objects and lining the walls with sheets of dark cloth. Only the cracked mirror remained, now covered entirely with a woolen shroud. Eliza was gone from the room. Holmes had insisted she rest, heavily dosed with laudanum. "Safer asleep," he had muttered. He laid the ring upon the desk and placed the lead-lined box beside it. Then he turned down the lamps and sat. "What now?" I asked. "We wait." The clock ticked softly. Outside, the wind had begun to rise, rattling the shutters. The fire sputtered, then caught again, throwing tall shadows across the cloth-covered walls. At precisely midnight, the ring pulsed. Not visually, not in the light, but in sound. A low, almost inaudible tone, felt more than heard, like a hum in the bones. The fire dimmed, and then it spoke, but not aloud. "You are not the one." Holmes didn't move. "She is." Holmes exhaled. "She is asleep. You cannot protect her." "Perhaps not," he said, "but I can trap you." The ring twitched on the table. A small tremor ran through the room, as though the walls themselves flinched. Holmes lifted the box. The hum grew louder, the shadows moved, and then, with a deft motion, he dropped the ring inside. The lid slid shut with a hiss, the fire roared back to life, and the shadows vanished. The room was still again. Holmes stood slowly. "It's not gone," he said, "but it's contained." I stared at the lead box on the desk. "What now?" "Now," Holmes said, "we hide it where no reflection can reach it." He turned toward the window, "and then we begin our search for the others." Outside, the fog thickened. The street was quiet, but in the upper pane of the window, behind our own reflections, a third shape lingered, then blinked away. Chapter 13. The memory that watched itself. The following morning arrived not with sunlight, but with a dense, colorless mist that clung to the streets and windows like a veil over a corpse. Holmes had scarcely slept. I found him at the table before dawn, his eyes fixed not on the ring, now locked within its obsidian prison, but on a blank sheet of paper upon which he had written and rewritten a single name. Mortlake. "Something about him remains unfinished," he muttered without greeting. "He has seen more than he admitted. Much more." I poured a cup of tea and waited. Holmes tapped his pen twice before rising abruptly. "We're going to see him," he announced. "But I thought you said he was under surveillance." "He was," Holmes replied, donning his coat. "But I made no effort to stop him from vanishing. He disappeared." Holmes gave a dry smile. "Precisely when I expected him to. And precisely where I suspected he would resurface. Among the few places he could observe without being seen." He paused. "We're going to Limehouse." The river district was alive with smoke and whisper. Fog moved in currents along the dockside alleys, and the boats groaned at their moorings like restless beasts. We passed crooked buildings with shingled eaves and lantern-lit doorways, every surface wet and reflecting more than it revealed. Holmes led us down a side passage no wider than a coffin, then up 3 flights of creaking stairs to a door without a number. He knocked once, then again, twice. The door opened a crack. A grey eye appeared. Then the door swung wide. Alaric Mortlake stood before us, not surprised, not alarmed, simply waiting. "I suppose you know everything now," he said. "Not everything," Holmes replied, stepping inside, "but enough to know you have more to tell." The flat was Spartan, no mirrors, no glass. The windows were covered in black cloth. A single lamp burned low on the table beside an empty chair. "You've been hiding," I said. "Not hiding," Mortlake replied. "Listening. The ring isn't the only object, and it isn't the oldest." Holmes took the seat opposite. "You knew about the others?" Mortlake nodded. "Sir Giles found only one. I found 3. I felt my blood chill. 3? Mortlake turned to a drawer and produced a thin folder. Inside were 3 crude sketches: an obsidian pendant, a brass locket, and a mirror no larger than a coin. Each had been etched with the same crescent-crossed symbol. "These were tracked through diplomatic channels," he explained, "passed between collectors, mystics, smugglers. But they don't act alone. They operate like lenses, each aimed at a different kind of mind: grief, anger, obsession." Holmes examined the sketches. "And the ring?" "Belongs to reflection, identity. It targets those who doubt what they see in themselves. That's why it couldn't anchor in me. I knew exactly what I was." "And what are you?" I asked warily. Mortlake gave a small, sad smile. "A historian who wanted to believe in something more." I was wrong. Holmes leaned forward. "You told Sir Giles to wear it." "I warned him not to," Mortlake snapped, "but someone else got to him. Someone I could never trace. The man Clara saw, the one in the gloves. I encountered him once, years ago, in Marrakesh. He was looking for a specific artifact. I never saw his face, only his reflection. And it didn't match." Holmes blinked. "Explain." He passed by a mirror. His body moved. His reflection didn't. There was silence. Then Holmes stood. "You said the ring requires doubt to enter, but this man, this collector, has no reflection at all, because he has no doubt left." Mortlake nodded. "He is a vessel, not a man." "And he's still searching?" I asked. Mortlake's eyes moved toward the cloth-covered window. "Always." Holmes turned to me. "We must return to Baker Street, now." We arrived to find the flat untouched, but the fire had gone out, and the mirror above the hearth, long dormant, now bore a single handprint in its frost. Holmes approached it slowly. "It's here," he said quietly. "Not the collector, no, but a part of him. A trace." I felt my throat tighten. "The ring is sealed." "Yes," Holmes replied, "but the pathway was opened. And it learned something last night, our names, our presence, our resistance. It will want to understand us now, to test the limits of its influence." He moved to the sealed box on the mantel. It was cold as stone, but pulsing ever so faintly, like the slow beat of a heart buried under frost. Then he turned to me with sudden urgency. "Watson, have you noticed anything strange?" I hesitated. "Reflections," I said. "Last night in the window, there was a shape behind us. A third figure. Gone in an instant." Holmes closed his eyes. "Then we are marked now." He moved to the writing desk and began scribbling on a sheet of parchment. After several minutes, he sealed it in an envelope and handed it to me. "If I am compromised," he said, "you must give this to Mycroft. He knows where the old monastery in Carcassonne is, the one the Watchers abandoned. If the ring survives, it must go there. That place resists memory." "You speak as though you'll be lost," I said quietly. Holmes looked at the cracked mirror. "Not lost," he murmured, but watched from both sides. That evening we sealed every reflective surface in the flat. Windows, mirrors, even the surface of Holmes's violin. The city continued to breathe and pulse beyond our shutters, but within our walls only silence reigned. Except, of course, in the glass I forgot to cover, the shaving mirror in the lavatory. I passed it just once, just briefly. And there, just behind my reflection, I saw Holmes, smiling, but I had not heard him enter. And when I turned, the room was empty. Chapter 14. Holmes' closes in morning broke reluctantly over London, casting a sickly light through the cloth-shrouded windows of Baker Street. I had slept fitfully, disturbed by dreams I could not remember and images I could not shake, shadows in mirrors, voices with no sound, and Holmes' reflection smiling where it should not. When I entered the sitting room, I found Holmes precisely as I had feared, seated in his chair, pale, unmoving, the sealed lead box resting on the table beside him. He stared into a handheld mirror, its surface covered in a thin frost that had no earthly cause. "You're awake," I said carefully. His eyes shifted toward me. "I never slept." That voice, quiet, flat, was unmistakably his. And yet it lacked something, the texture of familiarity, a subtle absence. "You saw it again," I said, not as a question. He nodded. "Twice. It's adapting, attempting to mimic, but it has not yet succeeded." I moved to the hearth, stirred the coals into reluctant flame. "Then we're still ahead." "No," Holmes said. "We're only slightly less behind." He rose abruptly, his coat already donned beneath his house robe, and moved to his desk where maps and notes had been scattered across the surface like the remnants of a storm. "There is only one move left," he said. "We must force its hand." I frowned. "You intend to confront it again?" "No," he said. "I intend to expose it, in the only way that matters." He reached for the envelope he had given me the previous night, the one addressed to his brother. "I believe the collector has been using a human intermediary," he said. "A host, or perhaps several, positioned within the city to handle the physical objects, the mirrors, the ring, and its siblings. These agents may not even realize whom they serve. But if we can identify one, you intend to draw it out through them?" Holmes nodded. "It watches through reflections, yes, but it acts through people." He placed the envelope back into his coat pocket and retrieved the sealed box. Then he turned to me, expression grave. "I need you to remain here." I stood. "Holmes?" "No arguments, Watson. You've been exposed once already, and your mind repelled it. I suspect that makes you a threat. You'll be targeted soon. I need you alive and lucid. Should I fail, you must bring the ring to Mycroft and ensure it is interred where memory cannot reach." His eyes flicked to the fireplace. "Burn everything else." I understood. But still I loathed the thought of him going alone. Holmes saw it in my face and offered the faintest smirk. "Trust me, I've been thinking in mirrors for days. Let's see if it can outwit its own reflection." Then, without another word, he vanished into the morning mist. Hours passed. I remained at the window, watching the fog twist through the street like a creeping malady. Pedestrians passed by with blank faces, their forms distorted in puddles and windows. I caught myself avoiding the mirror in the hallway entirely, and the shaving glass. I had covered it tightly with a towel. At precisely 4 o'clock, a letter arrived. A boy in a patched coat handed it to Mrs. Hudson, who gave it to me without ceremony. The envelope bore no handwriting, only a faint impression of the crescent-crossed seal pressed into the paper as though from memory. I opened it with gloved hands. "Watson, I have located the final vessel. It is not a man. It is not a place. It is an object older than the ring, older than the mind that shaped it. I write this from the Looking-Glass Hall, beneath the Mirror Lane archive, under Leadenhall. The collector keeps his memory there. Do not follow. Burn the mirror in the study, then wait. He will come for you. Shy read it twice. The Looking-Glass Hall. Mirror Lane. I had never heard of it. I grabbed my coat. The archive beneath Leadenhall was not marked on any city map. It had once been part of a private library, a forgotten wing sealed after a fire in 1848. But Holmes, ever the cartographer of the unseen, had traced it through old floor plans and insurance records. By the time I arrived, dusk had fallen. The iron gate to the passage was ajar. Within, the halls sloped downward, stone walls lined with ancient tiles, some cracked, some missing. The deeper I went, the more reflective the surfaces became. Tiles with mica, glass beads embedded in plaster, even old mirror shards set into mosaic patterns. And in every one of them, I saw movement. Not mine, not Holmes's. Something slower, more fluid. I reached the final door. A low groan echoed beyond it, like breath in a tunnel, and then a voice, clear, impossibly near. Dr. Watson. I froze. You should not be here. But now, you are. The door creaked open. Inside was not a room but a chamber of mirrors, tall, thin panes arranged in a spiral. At its center stood Holmes. He turned slowly, but he did not smile. Watson, he said, you were told not to come. I stepped forward. Holmes, what is this place? The collector's nest, he said, where the memories are fed. He held out the lead box. It wants it back, he said. The ring pulsed faintly through the sealed case. From the surrounding mirrors, shadows lengthened. Figures moved. My own face stared back at me from 6 different angles, each expression subtly wrong. And then, from behind Holmes, the glass opened. Not broke, not shattered, but opened, as though parted by an invisible hand. Something stepped through, clad in black, gloved in white, faceless, yet watching. Holmes turned to me. Leave now, Watson. But I could not move. The collector had arrived, and the ring was waking. Chapter 15. The Final Gathering. The moment the collector stepped through the mirror, the air collapsed inward as though the room itself had exhaled its final breath. The tall panes of glass trembled with silent resonance, and every reflection, mine, Holmes, even those of the room, flickered once, then steadied in unnatural unison. It was like standing within an eye that had just dilated. The collector's form was deceptively human, tall, perfectly still. The black coat was finely tailored, its seams too smooth to be hand-stitched, and the gloves, pristine, white, expressionless, rested at its sides like exclamation marks held in abeyance. But the face? No, there wasn't one. Not in the way a face should be. What stared at us was a shimmer, like light bent through still water. The outline of features existed only a suggestion, a memory half forgotten. Holmes didn't move, nor did I. The collector stepped closer. Its feet made no sound. Give it to me, it said, not with words, but through our own thoughts, pressed against our minds like breath against a window pane. The voice was cold, sexless, infinite. It was not commanding. It was expecting. Holmes remained still. The lead box hung from his hand, suspended by a thin brass chain. You use them, Holmes said softly. Rathborne, Harrow, Clara. You mirrored their fears back into them, until they shattered. They offered reflections. I offered memory. False memories, I spat. Nothing is false that is remembered. The collector tilted its head, barely. It did not blink. Holmes stepped slightly to the left, placing himself between the ring and the being. You need hosts, he said. You can't act in this world without permission. So you pull permission from the mirror, from their grief, their doubt, their uncertainty. Willingness is weakness. Mirrors are honest. It raised a hand. The mirrors in the chamber shimmered, and in each, Holmes and I were shown not as we were, but as we feared we might become. Holmes stood with empty eyes, a marionette of logic. I stood alone, forgotten, weeping into my coat. Its weapon is truth distorted, Holmes whispered to me. It doesn't lie. It reflects you wrongly enough to undo you. I tightened my grip on the revolver in my coat pocket. I hadn't drawn it yet because I knew instinctively it would do no good. The collector began to circle, its steps eerily synchronized with the ripple of the mirrors. You were warned, it said. Now you will become what you see. And suddenly, it lunged. Holmes spun the lead box away, flinging it to the edge of the chamber. The collector's hand missed it by inches, and with that failed reach, the room shuddered. Not the floor. The reflections. They blurred, warped, then multiplied. Dozens of versions of ourselves, some frozen mid-step, some moving faster than reality could hold. In the confusion, Holmes shouted, "The mirror at the center!" I turned and saw it. One tall pane, untouched, clear, still, not cracked, not warped. Unmoving. Even the collector had no presence in its glass. "That's it," Holmes cried. "The source, the first." As I moved toward it, something inside me twisted. The reflections around me reached for me, long-limbed, flickering grotesques mimicking my motion a half-second too late. Each step felt like walking through memories that weren't mine. I reached the mirror, raised the revolver. "If you break it," the voice came again, "you lose yourselves." Holmes appeared beside me. That is the point. Together, without hesitation, we struck. My revolver's butt. Holmes's cane. The glass cracked, not like a window, but like bone. A single, sharp fracture zigzagged from top to bottom. The collector screamed. It was not sound. It was every mirror in the chamber vibrating at once, shrieking through silver and light. I fell to my knees. Holmes remained standing, face grim. The collector staggered. Not physically, but its form began to unravel. Its features shifted from smoke to fog to flicker. Behind it, the other mirrors shattered one by one, each releasing a burst of cold air, as though purging the breath of the dead. Then, from the lead box, the ring glowed. Not with light, but with memory. Faces flickered within it. Rathborne, Mortlake, Clara. For a moment, even Holmes's eyes mirrored the glow. Then, silence. The collector collapsed inward, folding like a sheet of dark silk into the nearest mirror. Only this time it did not pass through. It vanished into the glass. Trapped. Reflected no longer. Holmes approached the cracked central mirror. Its surface had clouded, dulled. He raised the lead box again, opened it slowly. The ring no longer pulsed, no longer glowed. It sat inert, lifeless. "I believe," he said. "It is done." I exhaled. But even then, at the edge of my vision, I saw one mirror remain intact, and in it, for just a heartbeat, I saw Holmes, smiling, but again. I had not seen him smile. Not once since we entered. Chapter 16. The Reveal. Holmes breaks down the crime. We returned to Baker Street just before midnight, the lead box sealed once again and tucked into Holmes's inner coat pocket, as though it were nothing more than a paperweight. Outside, the fog had finally lifted, and the moon, pale and indifferent, hung over the rooftops like a solitary eye. Yet I could not shake the sense that something of the collector still lingered behind us, watching not from the street, but from within. Holmes made no mention of our near death, no commentary on the shattered reflections or the scream of unvoiced memory. He simply removed his coat, lit his pipe, and stared silently into the hearth. I could not bear the quiet. Was it truly vanquished? For now, he replied. The mirrors are broken. The link is severed. The vessel is cold, but not destroyed. He exhaled smoke slowly. You cannot destroy reflection, Watson. Only deny it. I sat down opposite him, my limbs still stiff with tension. Explain it all, I said at last. From the beginning. Not the haunting, but the truth. The logic. Holmes turned his gaze to me. The old light of clarity rekindled in his eyes. Very well, he said. It began with Sir Giles Rathbourne's possession of the ring, an ancient artifact etched with symbols not of any known human tradition. It was not valuable for its material, but for its function. The ring was crafted to serve as a memory anchor, a mechanism of psychic feedback. It did not grant visions. It magnified them, fed upon them. He leaned forward. Sir Giles was a man riddled with doubt. You recall his extensive collection of pseudo-ritual artifacts, all with dubious provenance. He sought connection, confirmation. When he slipped the ring on his finger, it gave him what he wanted, reflection of meaning, a mirror of identity. But it was a false reflection, shaped by the thing that watches from the other side, the collector. And Clara? I asked. She too gazed too long, Holmes said. Though she never wore the ring, the mirror absorbed her longing, her desperation to understand the loss of her father. That desire made her susceptible. The ring only needed an observer, someone close enough in emotion and distance to transmit. He rose and retrieved a folded letter from his writing desk, Mortlake's final notes. The collector is not a man, Holmes said. Not in any sense we recognize. It is a will, a lingering echo from some deep mental plane where memory and identity are one and the same. It cannot act in our world unless permitted. The ring, the locket, the mirror, these were permissions, keys. And the murders. Holmes turned grim. Not murders in the conventional sense. The victims were not killed by hands, but by mental inversion. Their own identities fed back into them, amplified and twisted until collapse. The mirror showed them what they feared most, and they became it. Rathbourne saw madness. Harrow saw guilt. Clara saw absence. And Mortlake, he saw the truth, and it undid him. There was silence for a moment, broken only by the crackle of the fire. I spoke quietly. But why us, Holmes? Why did it target you? He tapped the bowl of his pipe. Because I refused to doubt myself, he said. And in doing so, I became its puzzle, an unreflective surface. It wanted to break that. It wanted to see itself in me. He reached for the sealed lead box, running one hand across its dull surface. But it failed, not because I was immune, but because I was watched. Watched? By you, Watson, he said. Every reflection needs an observer, but I already had one, a true one, someone who saw me as I am, not as I fear to be. And that, he tapped the box. That is why it lost. I was silent. A strange tightness welled behind my throat. And the collector? I managed at last. Holmes gazed at the dying coals. It is dormant now, he said. Contained, not destroyed. These things do not end, Watson. They wait. The ring will be taken to Mycroft and placed deep within the vaults at Carcassonne, beneath layers of forgetfulness, where even mirrors do not function. But one day, someone else may look too long. I shuddered. Then we've delayed the inevitable. He smiled faintly. Isn't that all any victory is? I stood to pour us both a brandy. My hands trembled slightly. Holmes took his glass and raised it, not to toast, but to catch the light. I watched him closely. His reflection stared back exactly as it should. He caught my glance and gave a small nod. Yes, he murmured. It is still me. And so ends the case of the ring that reflected nothing. A case not of theft or bloodshed, but of perception and truth, twisted and returned. It remains one of the strangest episodes I have ever recorded, not merely because of the forces we encountered, but because, for once, Holmes did not conquer with logic alone. He prevailed because he had allowed someone else to see him. I never told him what I saw that night in the mirror. Not fully, and I never looked into that glass again. Some reflections are best left unseen.